record this for our friends who can't join. All right, so you all should have completed the blood typing activity, and I can't wait to see how you all did. So blood types are kind of an interesting thing. So let me grab a whiteboard here. This is my first time trying this, so be patient. Let's see, I want to draw. Okay, so, oh cool, it's working. So basically, you have your, can you all see the screen okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
Is 11 o'clock too early for you guys? Wow.
Yes.
Our eyes are looking a little fatigued, friends. Okay, so we have here a red blood cell, okay? And red blood cells can have these things called antigens. And an antigen is just a protein that sticks off the cell. And there are two possible antigens. You could have the A antigen, the B antigen, or you could have a combination of the two or neither. So you could have the AB antigen, or you could have no antigens and have type O. So what the antigens mean is that off of this red blood cell, there is one of these four options. Either there's the A antigen that's present, the B antigen, both A and B antigens are present, or there aren't any antigens present and you have type O. So that's pretty simple and easy to understand. But the interesting thing here is that antigens are proteins that your body recognizes as being foreign. So for example, like everything else in my life, I have type A blood because everything in Brian's life is an A. So if this were Brian's red blood cell, off this red blood cell, you would see an A. Now, what that means is that I could only receive blood from someone who either has this antigen or from a red blood cell that doesn't have any antigens. So the reason that type O is called the universal donor is because it doesn't have any antigens on it, on the surface of the blood cell. So when you give type O blood, basically anyone can receive that because there are no antigens on it, and no one's immune system would recognize it as being foreign. But let's say something horrible happened to me at the hands of salty students, and I needed a blood transfusion, and they gave me type B. Well, I don't have any B antigens in my body. So if I were injected with type B blood, my body would see that B protein and it would recognize it as foreign. And it would mount an immune response and it would be this horrible, horrible thing and I could die. So basically with blood typing, certain blood cells have an antigen, either A, B, both A and B, or they don't have an antigen on them, that your body recognizes as foreign. The other thing that complicates things is that there's actually a second antigen, and that second antigen is called the Rh factor. And the Rh factor is usually denoted as either positive or negative. So again, this is Brian's red blood cell here. Again, I told you everything in my life is an A, and that's true. But really, everything in my life is an A plus because I have the Rh factor. So that means that I can receive blood that either has or does not have the Rh factor. Because blood that does not have the Rh factor, my body won't recognize as foreign. The problem is someone who's negative. So let's say you have A negative blood. If I gave you my A positive blood, this Rh factor would be recognized as foreign to your body, and again, it would be an immune response. So the blood that is the universal donor is, let's see, the universal donor is O negative. And the reason O negative is the universal donor is because O negative doesn't have any antigens on it, and therefore anyone can receive it because their body won't recognize it as being foreign. AB positive would be the universal recipient because it can receive any type of blood and its body would not recognize it as being foreign. Does anyone have any questions about blood types?
No.
So is the Rh factor just another protein like A and B?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. All right, I gotcha.
Great question. There we go. Cool. Well, I'll share my screen and we'll just talk about blood. So you all probably know a little bit about blood already before you came into this class. And you probably knew that blood carries oxygen and that it takes oxygen to lots of places throughout your body. Just as important, it is responsible for taking waste out of those organs. The other really important thing that blood does is help transport hormones throughout your endocrine system. And we talked about that a couple weeks ago. Let's see, we're not going to go through all of this. Blood does help prevent fluid loss through clotting, and white blood cells prevent infection. So what I really want to talk to you guys about today is the different components of blood and white blood cells, because there are lots of really good stories here that are not necessarily super intuitive to just read about on your own. So blood is technically the only fluid tissue in your body. And we talked about this when we were going through different tissues, but it's actually a type of connective tissue. And there's a couple reasons. One is that plasma, which is about half of the volume of blood, if not a little bit more, is matrix, technically, which makes it connective tissue. And there are also fibrous proteins in blood that help play a role in blood clotting. Those fibrous proteins are similar to other proteins that you would find in connective tissue. So there are three types of cells in blood. You have erythrocytes, which are red blood cells, and leukocytes, which are white blood cells. So leukocytes are white blood cells. Leukemia, you all have heard of leukemia, yes?
Mm-hmm.
So leukemia is a genetic cancer of white blood cells. So if you've ever wondered what leukemia was, it's a cancer of leukocytes. So if you were to draw blood, you would spin it down in the centrifuge, and you can see that it is a suspension that consists of plasma and erythrocytes. Now what's interesting is that your white blood cells represent less than 1% of all the blood in your body, which is pretty interesting. And your white blood cells a lot too. So the other interesting thing is that your red blood cells, for all intents and purposes, your red blood cells are not cells. They do not have a nucleus. They do not have organelles. So as a result, I don't know if you've ever thought of this before, but your red blood cells do not divide by themselves. Your red blood cells do not go through mitosis because there's no nucleus for them to divide. So I think that's really interesting. Red blood cells come from stem cells in your bone marrow that divide to replace them. In fact, the only cells in your blood that do divide are white blood cells. Those are the only cells that are actually cells. Now, here's an interesting thought question for you. Do you all agree that a forensic scientist could go out into the field and test blood at a crime scene and use that blood to determine who committed that crime. Do you all agree with that? That you can use blood to get DNA evidence?
Yes.
I agree.
Duh.
Where does the DNA come from?
Cells?
What other cells in the blood aren't red blood cells?
Yeah, you're right, Rachel. Yeah, red blood cells do not have DNA in them because they do not have a nucleus. I think that that's kind of a mind-blowing fact. I don't know if that's super cool to you, but like DNA is only found in white blood cells. And what's interesting is just going back to the fact that the only cells in your body that have DNA, or the only cells in your blood that have DNA are white blood cells. So all the DNA that would be found at a crime scene would be found in the white blood cells. I think that's really interesting and kind of surprising. You have about 1 gallon to 1.5 gallons of blood in your body. It depends on whether you're a male or female. Women have slightly less blood than men do. You also have about 4 to 6 million red blood cells per microliter. Now, again, that's per microliter. So there are 1 million microliters in 1 liter. So you have literally trillions of red blood cells in your body. So again, that's 4 to 6 million. You multiply that by 1,000 to get what you have per liter. So that's we're now in the billions, and then you multiply that by 4 to 6, depending on whether you're a male or female. So it's kind of cool. This is what your blood actually looks like if you were to do some histology. You would see red blood cells, which kind of look like little donuts, and then you have different types of white blood cells, or your different types of leukocytes, and you would have your platelets. Cool. Okie dokie. So with erythrocytes, they are basically just a sack of hemoglobin. Literally the only thing inside this little donut or inner tube of a red blood cell is hemoglobin, which is going to allow oxygen to be transported to the body, and it allows carbon dioxide to be transported throughout the lungs. Now, there's a little bit of chemistry here, and that chemistry is related to this thing called affinity. Oxygen has a really good affinity with hemoglobin. They bind together really well. There are other things that bind together with hemoglobin. Carbon dioxide, for example. You may have heard of this poison called carbon monoxide. The problem there is that carbon monoxide has a much greater affinity for hemoglobin than oxygen does. So carbon monoxide poisoning is such a big deal because carbon monoxide binds to hemoglobin like 2,000 times better than oxygen does, which isn't great.
So does that mean it's harder to like get rid, like have it wasted, like so they transport it and then get rid of it, so it's harder to do that? What does that mean?
I don't understand your question.
Like, what does that mean if it binds better with carbon monoxide?
Oh, that
So
means,
does that mean that it's replacing the oxygen
correct,
and you're getting less oxygen to your body?
yes, exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep, with carbon monoxide, which is CO. Yeah, so basically all hemoglobin is, you can kind of think of it like a rocket affair, right? So, the molecules get on, they go on a trip to wherever they're going to go, and then they get off. Kind of like
A bus.
Sure. So about 1 billion oxygen molecules are transported per red blood cell. That's pretty dope. But let's move on. I know a lot of you guys are athletes. You may have heard of a hormone called EPO, or erythropoietin. And this is an amino acid-based hormone. So hopefully you remember that it works by binding outside of the cell and causing a signaling cascade, leading to some sort of effect. But basically, what some athletes will do is they will take erythropoietin artificially to make their blood thicker. What that's going to do is transport oxygen more effectively, and it would allow you to recover faster after your injuries or after weightlifting, which would theoretically make you perform better. And it actually works really well. But the problem is that it changes the concentration of red blood cells in your blood, which increases the risk of blood clotting, stroke, heart failure, death. So this is a banned substance. It's also kind of interesting that testosterone also increases erythropoietin. So it's pretty fun. So your red blood cells pretty much die after a couple months, and again, they don't have any organelles in them. I didn't mention this earlier. They also don't have mitochondria, so they do not use any of the oxygen that they transport. I think that's kind of a fun fact. So basically, after a few months, they die, and macrophages eat them. So there are also several red blood cell disorders. The most common one is anemia, which is just a generic type of disorder for when your body lacks blood. And that can be caused by like sickle cell anemia, or you just don't have enough blood around. There are lots of different types of anemias that you might read about. Okay, what I really want to talk to you guys today about more than red blood cells are leukocytes. Leukocytes make my heart really, really happy. Hopefully they make your heart really happy too. So white blood cells are pretty dope because they make up less than 1% of your blood. They're the only cell that's actually a cell in your blood, and they defend against disease. But the way your white blood cells work is not necessarily intuitive. What do you currently think about the way your white blood cells work? Like, what do you know about them?
They kill germs.
Okay, they kill germs. How do they do it?
They signal T cells or something. I don't know.
They eat
They
them.
shank them.
Interesting.
That's the disease, and they kill it.
Something with B cells and T cells, or is that a different thing? I don't remember.
Good question. B and T cells are a type of lymphocyte. So we're actually about to talk about that here in a second. So there are 5 types of leukocytes. Never let monkeys eat bananas is to help you remember them in order. So neutrophils are the most abundant, followed by lymphocytes. Rachel was talking about earlier. These are your B and T cells. Monkeys are your monocytes. E are eosinophils, and B are basophils. So let's start with neutrophils. Neutrophils are dope little cells. They make up most of your white blood cells. Over half of your white blood cells at any given time are neutrophils. So you are really going to see these in acute infections like appendicitis, meningitis, the flu. And what neutrophils do, these are bad little cells. So Isaac mentioned that they shrink bacteria. Oh, he's right. Literally, what neutrophils do is that they kind of have these barbed wire little proteins on the outside of the cell. And what neutrophils will do is go up and hug a bacteria cell and stabs it. And then it eats it. So that's what they do. Neutrophils go up to bacteria, they shank them, and then they eat them. They are also very attracted to inflammation. So when an inflammatory response is happening, usually we'll see that by redness, rashing, heat. Neutrophils are going to go to the site of that injury and be there to help take care of it. Now, neutrophils are not specific. They are not specific. They constantly circulate throughout your body. And the way neutrophils work is if they recognize something as foreign, they literally just stab it and eat it. Your neutrophils do not ask questions. They take prisoners. They literally just kill them. That's what they do. I like neutrophils. They're my spirit leukocyte. The next type of leukocyte is called an eosinophil. I think these are the cutest of the white blood cells. To me, it looks like it's wearing earmuffs. Do you see this? Or if you're a fan of Pokemon, it kind of looks like a Venonat. I don't know if that's helpful for you. But eosinophils are dope little cells. They're kind of gross. They destroy parasitic worms. So you would see elevated eosinophils in someone who has a parasite. So that's kind of gross. They secrete enzymes and they digest the worms chemically. They are also thought to play a role in allergies and asthma. So that's kind of fun. Basophils are really big white blood cells. They are a tiny portion of white blood cells. Only about 1% of all white blood cells are basophils, but they contain histamine. So what all do you know about histamine?
It makes you swell and stuff.
Inflammation.
Is
Causes allergic reactions.
yeah.
Inflammation.
So
It bites stuff, but then it swells, and that's like a mosquito bite. It bites you, and then histamine, like, what's this stuff? And then it swells.
yes. So you take an antihistamine to reduce the effects of basophils. But yeah, histamine comes from basophils, which are a type of white blood cell. The only white blood cell that I'm guessing you knew about are lymphocytes are B and T cells. They make up about a quarter or so of your white blood cells. Again, that will be increased though if you're super sick, depending on what you're sick with. So they're called lymphocytes because they hang out in lymphatic tissue, and we'll talk about that when we get into the immune system. But you have two types of lymphocytes, B and T cells. They're so named because of where they develop or where they mature. T cells mature in your thymus, which you probably remember is located just north of your heart. And B cells are called B cells because they mature in bone marrow. So what T cells do is they attack virus-infected cells and cancer cells. B cells produce antibodies, and we'll talk a lot about that later. But for now, that's B and T cells. The last little bit is about monocytes. They are huge cells. They're the largest of the leukocytes, and they are macrophages. So they just go around and eat things, and they assist lymphocytes to mount an immune response. So basically what happened, oh, someone's puppy. So when a B cell produces an antibody, and that antibody binds to a virus or a bacteria, the monocyte will go around then and eat it. So that's that. I do want to talk a little bit about leukocyte disorders. Leukemia is a white blood cell cancer, and it is usually a childhood cancer. So does anyone have any ideas as to why leukemia is more common in children than adults? Why might a child be more likely to get leukemia than an adult?
Because white blood cells divide more when you're a child.
Correct. Yep. Yep, it's the same reason that bone cancers are also tend to be more common in children. So yeah, that's true. Now, adults can certainly get leukemia as well. Now, what's interesting here is that leukemia produces leukocytes, like there's just a ton of them around, so they can't effectively prevent infection. So not only, there's no tumor with leukemia. It's one of the only cancers that doesn't form a tumor. It's just there's a ton of leukocytes around that do not function properly. And it doesn't stop infection. Mono goes around. It is so named the kissing disease. So with Valentine's Day coming up. Also, I don't know if you guys knew about this, but there's like measles outbreaks. Did y'all hear about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that makes me mad.
Yeah, here in a couple weeks, you're going to hear me make a video that is a subpsychotic rant about the anti-vaccine movement.
Please
So
do.
Oh my god, it makes me so mad.
Please.
you've been warned that that's coming down the pike.
I fully support that.
But at any rate, gosh, if only there was something we could do to keep these children from, dying.
Oh
At
yeah.
any rate, sorry. So mono is kind of cool. So mono, well, I'll say mono is interesting. Mono comes about from a virus, but it's named because of monocytes, because the cells look so big. Mono is actually due to lymphocytes that get infected, not monocytes. It's just the lymphocytes look so big. So to give you a comparison, monocytes are much bigger than lymphocytes. So when this was first diagnosed, the doctors looked underneath the microscope and they saw cells that looked like this for mono, or cells that looked like monocytes, but they were just really big lymphocytes that were infected. Yeah, so mono is highly contagious, and the last little bit that we'll talk about with blood are some disorders. A thrombus is a blood clot that develops in a vessel that has not broken off. So basically, it's just a blood clot that hangs out, really common in your leg. There's something called deep vein thrombosis, which is where a blood clot is located pretty deep within a vein, and these thrombus can break off and form what's called an embolus. Some of you all might remember back to your freshman year when you took my biomed class. One of the ways that I killed Anna was with a pulmonary embolism. I don't know if you all remember that. I don't remember which class I did that for. Basically, a pulmonary embolism is when you have a thrombus in between your heart and lungs, and it's blood flow, and you die. And you actually die very, very quickly. So what you can do is take some anticoagulant drugs to prevent your blood from clotting. What aspirin,
Out there.
heparin, and warfarin do. One note, though, this is kind of important in case you're ever in this situation. Have you all ever heard the advice that someone who's having a heart attack should take an aspirin?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is good advice, because what aspirin is going to do is block platelet formation. So basically, if someone thinks that they're having a heart attack, they'll take an aspirin and it will be a little bit slippery so the blood won't clot. But listen carefully. They need to chew the aspirin, not just take it with water and swallow it. So if someone's having a heart attack, they need to chew it. Anybody know why?
So it'll absorb into the bloodstream faster.
Well done, Bailey. So I will leave you, to explore the rest of this. I wanted to give you the highlights in our time together, and I wanted to see your faces rather than make a video that you might or might not watch. Because the last video that I made had 7 views, you little turds. Watch the videos I make.
2 of them.
Actually, I'm not kidding about watch the videos. I'm kidding about you little turds. But
I'm the one that's been disliking them.
I was wondering who disliked them. I was like, that's so weird. At me,
Can I
Britta.
make a public statement?
Oh gosh. Well, it's really good to see your faces. I'm really excited to see your faces on the 15th in class when we dissect our hearts together. So that'll be super fun. In the meantime, I'll post something for the rest of the week for Thursday and Friday. Do you guys still have school tomorrow? I don't.
Do you want to go now?
I don't.
Maybe a 2-hour delay.
Okay.
Most likely 2-hour delay.
So I'm probably going to put an interactive notes document out there for blood because I don't know. Well, I had one yet. But I don't think that you guys will have the opportunity to collaborate for the rest of the week because Friday's an e-learning day too.
I'm
It's
busy.
a big deal. All right, friends. Well, I will respect your time. Thank you for joining us today on this e-learning day. I hope you have a fun e-learning day and stay warm. I'm going to
You
stop.
too. Have a good one.
You guys are welcome to stick around and hang if you want to. But that's it. Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.